What if your blood pressure was silently killing you, and you didn't even know it? What if the mistakes you make every day are slowly eroding your health, one small choice at a time? These questions seem so simple, yet they strike at the heart of an issue that is often ignored, especially among seniors. Imagine this: it's a warm Sunday afternoon, and the Smith family is gathering for their weekly get-together. The house is buzzing with chatter, laughter, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. Linda, a 67-year-old woman with silver hair and a gentle smile, is preparing snacks in the kitchen. As usual, she's playing the role of the caring mother and grandmother. She moves around with a quiet grace, making sure everyone is comfortable, offering a cup of coffee, and engaging in conversations about the latest family news. But suddenly, everything stops. Linda, mid-sentence, freezes. Her face pales, and she grips the counter for support. Her breath becomes shallow. In the middle of a conversation about her grandson's soccer game, she feels the room start spinning. Her heart races. The familiar feeling of dizziness creeps in, and before she can react, she collapses. Panic erupts. Her daughter, Sarah, rushes to her side, shaking her gently. "Mom! Mom, are you okay?" Her son, James, calls for help, while the rest of the family stands frozen, unsure of what to do. The doctor says she'll be fine, just a minor episode. But what if it wasn't a simple incident? What if her body is sending out warning signs she's been ignoring for years? Linda's story isn't unique. In fact, millions of seniors across the country are living with high blood pressure, often without realizing the silent damage it's doing to their bodies. They go about their lives, thinking that the occasional headache or feeling of fatigue is just a part of getting older. But blood pressure issues can lead to more than just discomfort. They can lead to life-threatening conditions like heart disease, stroke, and kidney failure. And that's what makes this story so important. Because Linda, like so many others, was making the same mistakes that many seniors unknowingly make every day. Mistakes that, if left unchecked, could have long-lasting consequences. Are you making these same mistakes? Could you be putting your health at risk without even knowing it? Linda's collapse that afternoon wasn't just a wake-up call for her, it was a wake-up call for all of us. If we don't start paying attention to the warning signs and taking proactive steps to protect our health, we might end up facing the same fate. So, before we dive deeper into Linda's journey, let's pause for a moment and think, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Linda, it was her family. For others, it might be their career, their faith, or their dreams for the future. But no matter what it is, there's always something that keeps us going. And for Linda, her journey toward better health begins with that same drive, the drive to take control before it's too late. But it wasn't just Linda's heart that was under threat, it was her future. And that's why we need to pay attention to these crucial details, especially when it comes to something as essential as our blood pressure. The questions linger, don't they? Could something so simple, so manageable, actually be the silent threat lurking in the shadows? The one that slowly creeps up on you, unnoticed, until it's too late to turn back. Linda's experience in that moment was just the beginning of a much larger journey. One that would not only challenge her, but also serve as a lesson for us all. What's happening to Linda right now is the start of something that could change everything, but not just for her. Could this story be the spark that ignites a change in you? It's easy to ignore the little things, those small habits that pile up over time, but when it comes to our health, those little things can add up to something huge. And often, by the time we realize it, the damage is done. So, take a moment to reflect, are you taking care of yourself the way you should? Are you aware of the simple mistakes that could be putting your blood pressure at risk? If you're not sure, don't worry. Linda wasn't either. But in the next chapter, we'll explore what went wrong for her, and how she's about to learn a lesson that could save her life. Before you move on, hit subscribe and leave a comment below about where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning for you. And remember, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough. This journey is just beginning. Let's keep going, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Linda had always been the rock of her family. She had raised 2 children, been there for her friends through thick and thin, and always made sure her house was full of warmth, love, and home-cooked meals. But even with all the love she gave, she never seemed to take the time to care for herself in the way she deserved. At 67 years old, Linda had lived through a lifetime of joys and challenges. She remembered the early days when she and her husband, George, had built their life together from scratch. They had met in college, both with big dreams and even bigger hearts. They married young, started a family right away, and built a home that was always full of life. But life was far from easy. Linda had spent years working long hours in an office, managing the household, and raising her children, all while putting her personal needs on the back burner. She was a classic example of someone who did everything for everyone else, leaving little time to focus on her own health. Linda never thought much about her blood pressure. She wasn't overweight. She ate a relatively healthy diet, full of vegetables and lean meats. She walked every day, or so she thought. But over time, those little habits that had once served her well began to fade. The long work hours took their toll, and the stress of daily life crept in, unnoticed. George, who had always been her biggest supporter, passed away 10 years ago from a heart attack. It had been sudden and devastating. She was only in her late 50s at the time, and it left her with a gaping hole in her life. That's when she started to notice something wasn't quite right with her health. She began to feel more fatigued than usual, but attributed it to the stress of losing her life partner. She started to have more headaches, but wrote them off as a side effect of her busy schedule. Linda noticed a slight swelling in her ankles after a long day, but she didn't give it much thought. After all, wasn't that just what happened as you got older? But it wasn't just the physical symptoms that were piling up. Linda found herself emotionally drained. She became short-tempered with her kids, even though she loved them dearly. Her friends noticed her becoming more withdrawn. She wasn't the same joyful, energetic woman she once was. But Linda shrugged it off. Aging was tough, wasn't it? Everyone had their struggles. It wasn't until she started feeling lightheaded more often, and then that one afternoon at the family gathering, that the true reality of her health finally caught up with her. James, her son, had always been the level-headed one. He'd been her shoulder to cry on during the tough times, the one who stepped in when his father passed away to help with household repairs, financial decisions, and making sure his mom was okay. James had always been the first to remind Linda to see a doctor whenever something didn't feel right. But Linda had resisted, thinking she could handle things on her own. After all, she had always been fine before, so why would now be any different? But that day, when she collapsed in the middle of the family gathering, everything changed. Her family's concern was palpable, and James was the first to get on the phone to call for an ambulance. As she was being whisked away to the hospital, Linda finally started to see how much she had been ignoring her own health, and how much she had been taking it for granted. As she sat in the hospital bed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. She wasn't afraid of the hospital itself, nor the doctors, but she was scared of what might happen if she didn't take better care of herself. That was the moment she knew she had to make a change. The thing that had always been the most important to Linda, her family, was at risk. If she didn't prioritize her health, what would happen to them? They had already lost George, and now they could lose her too. She couldn't let that happen. Linda had spent so many years focused on everyone else that she forgot to take care of the most important person, herself. She realized now that it wasn't just about feeling good, it was about living a long, healthy life for her children, grandchildren, and everyone else who depended on her. James, who had been quietly observing his mom's realization, stepped forward. "Mom, I know you're scared. But we're here for you. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone. Linda looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, but also a spark of hope. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. For the first time in years, she felt like she could truly take control of her health. As the doctor entered the room to give her the results of her tests, Linda took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was to come. She knew her blood pressure had been dangerously high for years, but she had never fully understood the gravity of it. The doctor looked at her with a mixture of concern and compassion. Linda, your blood pressure is severely elevated. It's been causing strain on your heart and other organs, and it's important that we address it immediately. If you continue on this path, you're at risk for serious health problems, including a stroke or heart attack. Linda's heart sank. She had heard the words stroke and heart attack before, but she had never thought they applied to her. The doctor continued. But don't panic. We can help you. If you make some changes, start taking your medications regularly, adjust your diet, exercise, and reduce stress, we can get your blood pressure under control. But it's critical that you take action now. Linda nodded, determined. She wasn't going to ignore this warning any longer. She had spent enough of her life looking after everyone else. Now, it was time to look after herself. Linda's story is all too common for many seniors. In fact, high blood pressure affects nearly half of American adults, with a significant number of them not realizing the risks until it's too late. But Linda's turning point, her decision to take action, can serve as a wake-up call for all of us. Have you been putting off taking care of your health? Are there warning signs you've been ignoring, like headaches, dizziness, or fatigue? It's time to stop waiting for the worst to happen. Linda's experience shows that it's never too late to make a change. Stay tuned as we explore the common mistakes that people like Linda, and perhaps even you, are making when it comes to blood pressure. And more importantly, how we can correct them before they cause lasting damage. Linda had always prided herself on being independent. She was used to doing everything herself, managing the house, taking care of her family, and putting others' needs before her own. But now, sitting in the doctor's office, she realized she had been making serious mistakes, especially when it came to her health. Mistakes that weren't obvious at first but had built up over time, leading her to this moment. She wasn't the only one. Linda wasn't alone in her struggle. In fact, many seniors like her were making the same errors, often without even knowing it. Her doctor had explained to her the dangerous reality of high blood pressure and how it's often called the silent killer, for a reason. It didn't come with obvious symptoms at first. But there were warning signs, signs she had overlooked. In Linda's case, it had been the headaches, the swelling in her ankles, and the constant feeling of fatigue. But those were just the beginning. As the doctor listed the risks, stroke, heart attack, kidney failure, Linda began to understand that high blood pressure wasn't just an inconvenience. It could change everything. After the appointment, Linda's daughter, Sarah, drove her home, and the two women sat in silence, the gravity of the situation settling between them. I just don't understand, Mom, Sarah said, breaking the quiet. You've always been so strong, so careful about everything. How did we miss this? Linda looked out the window, lost in thought. I didn't want to admit it. I thought I could manage on my own. I thought it was just stress or getting older. Sarah's voice softened. But, Mom, you've been ignoring it for so long. And now look where we are. Linda's heart ached. She had spent years denying the truth. And now, the truth was staring her right in the face. She wasn't the only one who had been making mistakes. There were millions of people like her, seniors who felt invincible, who thought they were immune to the dangers of high blood pressure. The most frightening part was that high blood pressure could develop slowly, without anyone noticing, until it was too late. But Linda's mistakes weren't just about ignoring her symptoms, they were about the little habits she had developed over time. Simple things that, when combined, had put her health in jeopardy. As Linda sat at the kitchen table that evening, she thought about the things she had done wrong, the things she had taken for granted. There were certain lifestyle choices that had contributed to her condition, choices that she could now see were leading her down a dangerous path. These were mistakes that were easy to make, especially for someone like her who had lived a busy life and had always put others first. One of the first mistakes Linda made was not managing stress effectively. Linda had always been a perfectionist, always striving to do everything right. The demands of work, family, and life in general piled up, and instead of confronting her stress, Linda had internalized it. She had never really learned how to relax, to let go of the pressure. Over the years, that stress had slowly raised her blood pressure, putting a strain on her body. Another mistake was not keeping an eye on her diet. Linda had always been a good cook, preparing meals for her family that were hearty and delicious. But her meals often contained more salt and fat than she realized. She believed she was eating well because she avoided the obvious culprits, like junk food and fast food. But over time, the small amounts of salt she added to her dishes every day had accumulated, and it was one of the contributing factors to her high blood pressure. Then, there was the issue of lack of regular exercise. Linda had always enjoyed walking, but she never committed to a regular routine. She thought her daily movements around the house were enough to keep her active. But without a dedicated exercise plan, she had neglected the benefits of cardiovascular health and weight management that regular physical activity provided. Exercise helps lower blood pressure, and without it, Linda's heart was working harder than it should. Sleep was another major factor. Linda never had trouble falling asleep, but over the years, she had started waking up more frequently during the night. Between late-night family calls, worrying about the bills, or even stressing over little things, her sleep quality had worsened. Poor sleep had gradually taken a toll on her health, elevating her blood pressure further. And finally, neglecting regular checkups. Linda had seen her doctor occasionally, but she never took the time for consistent health screenings, especially for her blood pressure. She thought as long as she felt fine, everything was fine. But the reality was that high blood pressure often doesn't show symptoms until it's too late. Now, sitting at her kitchen table, Linda felt like she had been walking through life blindfolded. She had unknowingly made these mistakes, and now they were catching up with her. But there was one thing Linda had learned that day: it was never too late to make a change. She still had time to reverse the damage. And more importantly, she still had the will to do it. Linda wasn't going to let her health decline any further. She was going to fight back, one step at a time. Her doctor had given her a clear plan: take her medication regularly, reduce stress, adopt a heart-healthy diet, commit to regular exercise, improve her sleep, and monitor her blood pressure regularly. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. However, Linda knew that she wasn't the only one who needed to make these changes. Many seniors were making the same mistakes without realizing it. Linda knew that if she could turn her health around, so could they. But only if they were willing to acknowledge the mistakes they were making, just as she had done. The next day, Linda decided to call her friends, people who had been by her side for years. She knew they needed to hear the truth too, to start paying attention to their own health. She wasn't going to let her mistakes go unnoticed any longer. She had learned the hard way that these mistakes weren't something to take lightly. Linda's realization serves as a warning to all of us. The small mistakes we make every day can add up in ways we never imagine. Stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, bad sleep, and neglecting regular checkups are just some of the factors that can contribute to high blood pressure and other health issues. The good news is that it's never too late to make a change. The question is, will you make that change before it's too late? Stay tuned as we explore how you can avoid these common blood pressure mistakes and take control of your health today. Linda's journey is just beginning, and we're going to walk through every step of the way with her. Linda woke up early the next morning, her mind already racing. The previous day's doctor's appointment had left her with a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in years. The decisions she made from this point forward would shape not only her health, but her future. As the sun peeked through the blinds, casting soft rays on the floor, Linda realized it was time to make real changes, changes she could no longer avoid. But even as she made plans to take action, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Her life had been full of so many what-ifs and maybes when it came to health. What if it was too late to make a difference? What if she failed? The fear of not being able to reverse the damage was daunting. But deep inside, she knew that sitting idly by would be the biggest mistake she could make. Linda had always been a strong woman, but she also knew that strength wasn't just about enduring, it was about making choices and facing challenges head-on. This was her opportunity to fight back against the quiet, insidious force of high blood pressure. It was time for action. The doctor had prescribed medication to help lower her blood pressure, and Linda was determined to take it as directed. That first morning, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small pill bottle in her hand. It seemed so simple, yet it felt like such a huge commitment. Taking medication meant admitting that her health was not in her control, that there were things out of her hands. But Linda knew that accepting help was part of the journey. She wasn't surrendering to her condition, she was choosing to fight it with every tool at her disposal. That first dose felt like a promise to herself. She had spent too many years ignoring her health, too many years putting everything and everyone ahead of her. Now, for the first time in years, she was putting herself first. After taking the medication, Linda felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with doubt. Would it work? Would she feel better? The unknowns were terrifying, but she didn't have time to wait for the answers. She had to trust the process and give it time. Next on Linda's list was adjusting her diet. She had always prided herself on cooking hearty meals for her family. Meals that filled the house with warmth, comfort, and love. But now, she realized her cooking habits, though well-meaning, had contributed to her high blood pressure. Linda had relied too much on salt, used too much butter, and hadn't paid enough attention to the nutritional value of the meals she prepared. She made a list of healthier foods, leafy greens, whole grains, fruits, and lean proteins. Linda decided to start small. Instead of overhauling her entire diet overnight, she would focus on cutting out excess salt and adding more fruits and vegetables to her meals. She started by swapping out her usual afternoon snack of chips for a handful of almonds and some fresh fruit. It felt like a small victory. One choice at a time, she was taking control. But old habits died hard. That evening, as she prepared dinner for her family, Linda found herself reaching for the salt shaker without thinking. The impulse was automatic, almost comforting. But she stopped herself. She reminded herself of the promise she had made, to do better. Slowly, she put the salt shaker down and grabbed the herbs and spices she'd been meaning to use. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. As she sat down with her family at the dinner table, Linda felt a small sense of pride. She wasn't just feeding them food, she was feeding them health. The shift in her mindset, though subtle, was profound. It was no longer just about feeding her family, it was about nourishing herself, too. Exercise was another major hurdle for Linda. She had always been a fan of walking, but over the years, it had become less and less of a priority. Her routine had become a blur of chores, errands, and family obligations. But now, Linda knew she had to make time for her health. She decided to start slow. Each morning, after taking her medication, she would go for a short walk around the block. It wasn't much, but it was something. The first walk felt exhausting. Her legs ached, and she found herself gasping for breath after just 10 minutes. But that's the thing about starting over, you don't begin with perfect form. You begin with effort, determination, and the will to keep going. Linda pushed through those initial challenges, and soon enough, those short walks started to feel easier. After a week, she increased her time to 20 minutes. It wasn't long before Linda felt the benefits, clearer thinking, more energy, and a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. Sleep had always been a struggle for Linda. Between her busy days, late-night worrying, and the occasional family emergency, restful sleep had become a rarity. But she knew that improving her sleep was crucial to managing her blood pressure. Linda started with small steps to improve her sleep routine. She turned off her phone an hour before bed, dimmed the lights, and started reading a book to relax her mind. At first, it was difficult to break the habit of scrolling through social media before bed. The world felt so far away when she wasn't connected, but Linda knew that disconnecting was the key to restful sleep. Over time, her quality of sleep improved. She started waking up feeling less groggy and more refreshed. The physical benefits were apparent, her energy levels increased, and she found herself able to focus better throughout the day. But it wasn't just the physical effects that made the difference. For the first time in years, Linda felt a sense of peace. Linda's journey was just beginning. Every change, from taking her medication to improving her diet, adding exercise, and getting better sleep, felt like a small victory. But those small victories added up to something much greater: hope. Hope that she could regain control of her health. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Linda wondered if she would slip back into her old habits. But each time she faced a challenge, she reminded herself of why she was doing this: for her family, for her future, and most importantly, for herself. Her story was one of gradual transformation. But the journey had just begun. The question now was, how far could she go? As Linda continued down this path, one decision at a time, she knew that change wouldn't come overnight. But with each step, she was rewriting her story. A story of a woman who fought back against the silent killer and took her life back into her hands. As the weeks passed, Linda's daily routine began to settle. The walks became easier, her meals were healthier, and her sleep had improved. She felt more energized and, surprisingly, more confident than she had in years. The changes were small, but they were cumulative, and she could feel the difference in her body, her mind, and her spirit. However, even though Linda had made significant strides, she couldn't help but notice a lingering unease. It wasn't physical, it was something deeper, something that seemed to be pulling at her from the inside. The initial excitement of taking control of her health had begun to fade, and now, doubts crept into her mind. Was she doing enough? Was the medication truly working? And perhaps the biggest question of all, had she really addressed the root of her health problems? One afternoon, after another long walk and a satisfying dinner of grilled chicken and sautéed vegetables, Linda sat on the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of herbal tea. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the peaceful evening should have brought her comfort. But instead, a feeling of dread began to seep in. It was time for her regular checkup, and Linda knew that the upcoming visit would reveal the truth. Had all of her efforts been enough? The tension in Linda's chest grew as the days passed, until finally, the morning of her appointment arrived. Linda had become used to the idea of the doctor being a trusted guide on this journey, but now, it felt like the final test, a moment of truth. Would she hear the words she so desperately wanted to hear: "Your blood pressure is improving, Linda. Keep doing what you're doing"? Or would the doctor confirm her worst fear, that the damage done by years of neglect could not be undone? She couldn't shake the sense that her body had been betraying her for so long, and maybe, just maybe, it was too late to make a real difference. The sterile smell of the doctor's office hit Linda as soon as she stepped inside. The usual hum of fluorescent lights, the soft rustle of paper, and the low murmur of other patients filled the air. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. This was it. This was the moment where she would either have the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders, or she would be crushed under its pressure. She sat nervously in the waiting room, tapping her foot anxiously. Her thoughts raced. Was her blood pressure still too high? What if she needed to be hospitalized? What if the changes weren't enough, and she had left it all too late? When the nurse finally called her name, Linda stood up, almost stiff with anticipation. The nurse led her to an examination room, and Linda sat on the crinkling paper-covered bed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps outside the door. Moments later, Dr. Stevens entered, clipboard in hand, her kind eyes taking in Linda's nervous expression. "Good to see you again, Linda," Dr. Stevens said, smiling warmly. "How have you been feeling?" "I've been making some changes, like you suggested," Linda replied, her voice wavering slightly. "Eating better, walking more, trying to get more rest, but I'm still worried." The doctor nodded, sitting down across from her. "I understand. It's not easy making these changes, and I know it can be frustrating not knowing exactly how well they're working. But that's why we have these checkups, to see where we're at, to track your progress. And I promise you, we'll get through this together." Linda smiled weakly. Dr. Stevens' words were comforting, but the anxiety that lingered still wouldn't let go. "Let's take your blood pressure, shall we?" the doctor said, preparing the cuff. The seconds ticked by slowly as Dr. Stevens wrapped the cuff around Linda's arm and began inflating it. Linda squeezed her eyes shut, holding her breath, feeling her heart beat faster than it had any right to. She knew this moment could be a turning point, one that could alter everything. The cuff deflated, and Dr. Stevens removed it with a soft click. She glanced at the reading, and for a long moment, Linda didn't dare look at her. Her mind raced, wondering what numbers the machine had revealed. Finally, Dr. Stevens looked up, her expression unreadable. Linda's heart sank. Was this it? Had everything she'd worked for been in vain? "Well, Linda," Dr. Stevens began, her tone carefully neutral, "your blood pressure has definitely improved." Linda's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the doctor in disbelief, her mind racing to process the words. "It's still a little above normal," the doctor continued, "but it's come down significantly since our last visit. The medication, the changes in your diet, your walks, they're all making a difference." Linda exhaled, the breath she had been holding for what felt like an eternity rushing out of her lungs. A wave of relief washed over her, and for the first time in months, she felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. That's great news," Linda said, her voice soft with emotion. "I honestly wasn't sure if I was doing enough. I felt like I was just getting started." "You've done more than enough," Dr. Stevens said kindly. "The fact that you've taken control of your health, made these changes, and stuck with them, well, that's the hardest part. You've laid the groundwork. Now, it's just about continuing on the path." Linda felt tears well up in her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to. How much fear had been swirling inside of her, until now. She had taken her first steps towards a healthier life, and those steps were working. For Linda, the doctor's visit wasn't just about getting a reading on her blood pressure, it was a revelation. She had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her health, and while the road ahead still had obstacles, she knew now that she wasn't alone. The fear and self-doubt she had carried for so long had finally started to dissipate. This was her turning point. Linda's journey was just beginning, and though the road to better health would take time, it had already become clear that the hardest part was over. She had taken control of her destiny. And that was something no one could take away from her. Linda walked out of Dr. Stevens' office feeling like a new person. The weight that had pressed down on her chest for months had lightened, and she felt the first true sense of relief in what seemed like forever. For weeks, she had lived in constant fear that her blood pressure issues would define her life, holding her back from enjoying the simple pleasures of everyday living. Now, for the first time, it felt like a possibility to live with balance and peace. As she stepped into the sunlight, the breeze lifting the strands of hair from her face, Linda felt as though she could breathe again. She had taken the first major step toward reclaiming her health, and for the first time in months, she believed that the future might be brighter than she had imagined. But the journey wasn't over. Linda had learned so much in the past few months. The importance of small, consistent changes, the power of hope, and, above all, the value of taking control of her own health. But she also realized that the hard part wasn't necessarily the diet changes, the exercise, or even the medication. The hardest part was the emotional transformation, shifting from a place of fear and helplessness to a place of empowerment. One of the most significant revelations came when Linda started reflecting on the reasons behind her habits. She had spent years avoiding the truth about her health, pretending that everything would be okay without truly addressing her lifestyle choices. The truth had been staring her in the face, but it wasn't until she confronted it that she realized how much she had taken her health for granted. That moment of truth, standing in Dr. Stevens' office, had forced Linda to confront her deepest fears. The diagnosis of high blood pressure wasn't just a wake-up call. It was a catalyst for change, the spark she had needed to begin rewriting her life. Looking back at the months of progress, Linda felt proud of herself. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was committed. The road had been full of bumps, setbacks, and moments of self-doubt, but each obstacle only deepened her resolve. Linda had begun sharing her journey with friends and family, and their support was invaluable. Her daughter, Sarah, was the most enthusiastic cheerleader. Seeing her mother take control of her health gave Sarah a new perspective on her own habits. In turn, Linda was motivated to keep going, knowing she wasn't just doing this for herself, she was setting an example for her daughter. Her husband, Dan, who had always been a steady, grounding force in her life, had also noticed the changes. He had been concerned for years, watching as Linda's health slowly deteriorated, but he had never pushed her. Now, he was fully on board, making healthier meals alongside Linda and walking with her each morning. Together, they were creating a new chapter in their lives. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving. Every walk, every healthy meal, every moment of rest added up to something more significant than just physical change. It was a change in perspective, a shift toward a life filled with intention and care. The lessons Linda had learned were ones that she could build on for the rest of her life. The initial fear and doubt that had clouded her mind in the beginning had started to fade into something more powerful, confidence. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up for herself every day, making the choice to prioritize her health even when it wasn't easy. Linda had also learned to embrace patience. The process of improving her health wasn't an overnight miracle, it was a slow and steady climb. But every small victory added up to bigger success. With each day, she was rebuilding herself, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. She wasn't just fixing her blood pressure, she was transforming her entire relationship with health, self-care, and her own body. As she looked ahead, Linda knew there would still be challenges. There would be moments of weakness, days when she didn't feel like walking or when she'd be tempted to fall back into her old habits. But now, she had the tools to face those moments. She had learned to lean into the discomfort, to press forward when the path seemed uncertain, and to trust that every effort was worth it. What had begun as a series of small steps, taking medication, making dietary changes, walking daily, had turned into something much bigger, a complete reawakening. Linda now saw every aspect of her life through a lens of wellness. She wasn't just trying to lower her blood pressure, she was committed to creating a life that would allow her to live fully and joyfully for years to come. One of the most profound lessons Linda had learned was the power of consistency. Each decision she made, no matter how small, had contributed to her success. It wasn't the grand gestures or overnight miracles that made the difference, it was the simple, daily choices that had added up to a new reality. And that gave Linda hope. Linda's story wasn't just about overcoming a health scare, it was about embracing the truth that health is a lifelong journey, not a destination. It wasn't about being perfect every day, it was about showing up for herself and making choices that would allow her to live the life she deserved. She had learned to value her health in a way she never had before, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation for everything else in her life. As Linda sat on the porch that evening, looking out over her garden, she realized something profound. The changes she had made in her life weren't just about lowering her blood pressure, they were about rediscovering herself. They were about finding a new sense of purpose, a renewed sense of vitality, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had not only survived this health crisis, she had grown stronger because of it. And that was the real victory. Linda knew that her journey wasn't over. There would always be more challenges to face, more lessons to learn, and more growth to experience. But she was no longer afraid of the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was also full of promise. And with each step, Linda knew she was making the right choice, for herself, for her family, and for the life she was determined to lead. The sense of triumph Linda felt after her checkup with Dr. Stevens didn't last long. In the weeks following that positive visit, she began to notice a subtle shift in herself. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. Slowly, like a creeping shadow, the urgency to maintain her healthy habits began to wane. She felt better, much better, and with that feeling came an unexpected temptation, comfort. For so long, Linda had been hyper-focused on her health. Every meal was planned, every walk was a must, every moment of downtime was used for rest and recovery. But now that her blood pressure had improved, it seemed like a little leeway wouldn't hurt. She could skip a walk here or there, indulge in an extra dessert, or allow herself a bit more sleep than usual. After all, hadn't she earned it? It started with small things, an extra slice of pizza at dinner, a day where she didn't feel like walking the full 3 miles, a morning where she lingered in bed for an extra hour. She justified it by telling herself that she was doing so well, that she had already made such great progress. But little by little, those moments of indulgence began to add up. Linda found herself slipping back into old habits, not out of negligence, but out of a growing sense of complacency. One Saturday afternoon, Linda and Dan decided to take a trip to a local farmer's market. It was a sunny day, and the warmth of the sun felt like a reward after weeks of steady effort. As they wandered through the stalls, Linda noticed the familiar temptation of old habits. There, right in front of her, was a stand selling freshly made cinnamon rolls, her absolute favorite. The scent wafted through the air, sweet and intoxicating. Without thinking, Linda found herself in line, ordering 2 cinnamon rolls. She hadn't planned on it. She hadn't considered the impact it might have on her health. But in that moment, the desire for something familiar, something comforting, overwhelmed her. She and Dan sat on a nearby bench, enjoying the warm, gooey pastries as the world bustled around them. "This is really good," Linda said, taking another bite. Dan looked at her with a hint of amusement. "You've been doing so well with your healthy eating. You sure about this?" Linda paused for a moment. The question felt loaded, almost like a challenge. Was it really worth it? Should she have said no to the cinnamon rolls? But in the end, she shrugged. "I'm not perfect. One treat won't hurt." As the day wore on, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. A small part of her had slid back into her old ways. It wasn't just the cinnamon rolls, it was the mental shift. She had started to believe that being good enough was sufficient, that doing just a little bit was okay. The next few weeks were a mix of highs and lows. Linda was still walking every day, but she wasn't as strict with her diet. She had allowed a few more indulgences, a few more days of relaxation that bordered on laziness. And while she still felt better than she had before, something inside of her felt off. She noticed herself becoming tired again, not the usual healthy exhaustion after a walk, but a deeper weariness that wouldn't go away. Her energy levels began to dip, and the mental fog that had cleared when she first started her journey began to return. She started to experience slight headaches, nothing debilitating, but enough to be noticeable. Her sleep, which had once been restful and rejuvenating, began to feel less restorative. She woke up tired, even after 8 hours of sleep. It didn't take long for Linda to realize what was happening. Her body was telling her that the comfort she had indulged in was coming at a cost. It wasn't a major setback yet, but it could easily become one. The small changes she had made, like the extra calories, the skipped workouts, and the extra sleep, were adding up, and her body was starting to rebel. She didn't want to go back to where she started. She didn't want to lose all the progress she'd made. But there it was, the ever-present pull of comfort, reminding her that it was easy to fall into old patterns when things seemed to be going well. One morning, Linda woke up with a headache that refused to go away, no matter how much water she drank or how much she rested. She decided to take a walk, hoping that the fresh air would help clear her head. But as she stepped outside, she felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue. Her body felt sluggish, and the walk that would have once been refreshing now felt like a chore. Halfway through the walk, Linda stopped. She looked around, taking in the familiar sights of the neighborhood, and suddenly, everything felt very different. It was like a fog had lifted, and she could see the truth clearly. She had started to take her health for granted. This wasn't just about food or exercise. It was about her mindset. She had lost the edge, the hunger to keep improving. The energy she had when she was first fighting for her health was now replaced by complacency. "I've got to snap out of this," Linda said quietly to herself. "I can't let comfort be the thing that undoes everything I've worked for." That afternoon, Linda sat down and took a moment to reflect. She reviewed her journey, all the steps she had taken to regain her health. She thought about the ups and downs, the challenges, the victories. She realized that this was a cycle, a common part of any long-term journey. There would always be times of comfort, where the temptation to relax and indulge was strong. But those were the times that required the most self-discipline. The path to better health wasn't a straight line, it was full of twists and turns, and Linda had to find the strength to keep going even when it was easier to stop. The following day, Linda got back on track. She returned to her walks, committed to being more intentional with her meals, and focused on getting a full night's rest without the temptation to hit the snooze button. She reminded herself that health wasn't about perfection, it was about consistency. Even when it felt easier to fall back into old habits, she had to stay focused on her bigger goal, living a long, healthy life. It was time to get serious again. Comfort had been her enemy, and now it was time to face it head-on. As weeks passed, Linda found herself back on track. Her energy returned, her headaches faded, and the mental clarity she had worked so hard for came back. But more than that, she regained her sense of purpose. She remembered why she had started this journey in the first place. To take control of her health, to live her life fully, and to be an example to her family. It wasn't always easy, but Linda knew one thing for sure, she was capable of staying on the path. And this time, she was going to finish what she started. Linda had learned a lot in the past few months. She had conquered the physical challenges that came with managing her blood pressure, adjusting her diet, committing to daily walks, and staying consistent with her medication. Yet, as much progress as she had made, there was one area that she hadn't fully addressed: stress. It wasn't that Linda wasn't aware of stress. She had dealt with it for years, running a household, balancing work and personal life, and caring for her family. But, in her pursuit of better physical health, Linda had failed to see how much stress had been affecting her overall well-being. It wasn't just her blood pressure that was at risk. It was her entire body. Stress had been lurking in the background, silently undermining all of her progress. And now, it was time to confront it head-on. Linda had always been good at keeping things together on the outside. She had a successful career, a loving family, and a full life. But what people didn't see were the sleepless nights spent tossing and turning, the endless to-do lists in her head, and the constant juggling of responsibilities. Linda was a perfectionist by nature. She pushed herself hard to meet everyone's expectations, her family's, her co-workers, and even her own. It wasn't that Linda didn't take time for herself, she had her walks, her healthy meals, and her moments of relaxation. But she had neglected one crucial aspect of her health, her emotional well-being. And now, she was feeling the effects. Linda realized she had been carrying around a heavy mental load without even knowing it. Her stress levels were high, and though she had worked hard to lower her blood pressure, she had never fully acknowledged the emotional and mental factors that contributed to her condition. Stress was, in fact, one of the primary triggers for high blood pressure, and without addressing it, her progress was incomplete. It wasn't until one particularly chaotic week that Linda truly understood the impact of stress on her health. She had been juggling a tight work deadline, helping Sarah with her college applications, and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy at home. By the end of the week, Linda felt completely drained. She was physically exhausted, mentally foggy, and emotionally spent. One evening, after dinner, Linda found herself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She had no energy to do anything. No energy to exercise, to cook a healthy meal, or even to interact with her family. She was simply tired. And not just physically, but emotionally drained. She felt like she was on the verge of burnout. It was in that moment that Linda realized something. Her body had been telling her something all along. Her blood pressure might have improved, but her stress had been left unchecked. It wasn't just the physical habits that needed work, it was her mindset. She had neglected to take care of herself emotionally, and now it was affecting her physical health once again. The next morning, Linda woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She couldn't continue ignoring the emotional side of her health. She needed to address the stress in her life before it took control. But she also knew that tackling stress wasn't as simple as just taking a few deep breaths. It would require a change in perspective, a shift in how she approached her daily life. Linda started with one simple practice: mindfulness. She had heard about it in various health articles and even from Dr. Stevens, but she had always dismissed it as too new age for her taste. But now, desperate for a solution, she decided to give it a try. She began by setting aside just 10 minutes each morning for mindfulness meditation. She found a quiet space in the house, sat comfortably, and focused on her breathing. At first, her mind wandered constantly, but she gently brought it back to her breath. It wasn't easy, but over time, Linda began to notice small changes. She felt calmer, more centered, and less overwhelmed by the constant stream of thoughts racing through her head. Along with mindfulness, Linda also began to practice self-compassion. She realized that part of her stress came from the unrealistic expectations she placed on herself. She had always believed that she had to be perfect in her career, in her role as a mother, as a wife, and as a woman. But perfection wasn't attainable. In fact, it was a source of unnecessary stress. Linda started to give herself permission to be imperfect. She no longer expected herself to be everything to everyone. She began saying no more often, asking for help when she needed it, and taking breaks when she was feeling overwhelmed. Instead of pushing through exhaustion, she learned to listen to her body, acknowledging when she needed rest and when she needed to slow down. The transformation wasn't immediate, but slowly, Linda began to feel lighter. She began to take stress in stride, seeing it as something manageable rather than something to fear. Her daily mindfulness practice allowed her to take a step back and respond to life's challenges with clarity, not anxiety. As Linda's stress levels decreased, she noticed that her relationships also began to improve. She wasn't as short-tempered with Dan, and she was more present when spending time with Sarah. Her family noticed the shift too. Sarah, who had always been a little anxious about her mom's health, began to see Linda in a new light. One evening, after a particularly lovely dinner, Sarah turned to Linda with a smile. "Mom, you seem so different lately. It's like you're really here with us." Linda smiled softly. "I think I finally realized that I can't be everything at once. I'm learning how to take care of myself, not just my body, but my mind too." As the weeks went by, Linda's commitment to managing stress became just as important as her physical health. The combination of mindful living, self-compassion, and setting boundaries created a new foundation for her well-being. Linda no longer felt as if she were running on empty. Instead, she was embracing a more balanced life, one where her physical and emotional health worked in tandem. She also found that her blood pressure continued to stay in a healthy range, something that didn't just come from the diet and exercise, but from her newfound emotional resilience. Linda understood now that health wasn't just a matter of controlling what went into her body, it was about creating space for peace and emotional balance as well. Her journey was far from over, but Linda felt more equipped to handle whatever came next. With every deep breath, every moment of mindfulness, and every healthy choice, she was carving out a new path, not just for herself, but for the future she hoped to share with her family. Linda's life had taken a significant turn since she had started prioritizing her health, both physical and emotional. She was on a solid path, managing her blood pressure, engaging in mindful practices, and making healthier choices. Yet, as with any journey, life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges her way. It all started with a routine checkup. Linda had been feeling great, her energy levels were high, and her blood pressure was steady. She felt confident that she was in control, that her days of worrying about her health were behind her. But that morning, as Linda sat in the waiting room at Dr. Stevens' office, her thoughts were distracted. She had been so busy lately, balancing family events and work deadlines, that she hadn't given herself the time to slow down. A slight headache had been nagging her for a few days, but she brushed it off. After all, she was doing everything right. There was no reason to worry. When Dr. Stevens walked into the room, he had a different look on his face than usual. His warm, reassuring smile was replaced with a more serious expression. "Linda, how have you been feeling?" he asked as he flipped through her medical chart. "I've been feeling great, really," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been keeping up with my walks, eating healthy, and working on my stress management." "That's good to hear," Dr. Stevens nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "Let's take a quick look at your blood pressure today." Linda rolled up her sleeve, preparing for the usual check. The cuff inflated, and Linda closed her eyes, mentally running through her usual self-assurance. She'd been so disciplined. Everything would be fine. But when the numbers flashed on the monitor, her heart skipped a beat. "Linda," Dr. Stevens said quietly, "your blood pressure is elevated again." Linda blinked, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" "It's been good. I've been doing everything you told me." Dr. Stevens gave a small sigh. "I know you've been diligent, and I'm not questioning your efforts. But the numbers don't lie. Your blood pressure is higher than it should be. It's not a crisis yet, but it's a warning sign." Linda felt the blood drain from her face. How could this be? She had done everything right. Her diet, her exercise, her stress management, all of it was in place. What had gone wrong? Dr. Stevens continued to explain that while Linda's physical habits were improving, there were other factors that needed to be considered. He discussed the possibility of hidden stressors, things that Linda hadn't fully addressed. While she had been mindful of her emotional well-being, Dr. Stevens suggested that some underlying stresses, such as work pressure or unresolved past trauma, might still be silently contributing to her blood pressure spikes. "It's not just about the obvious things, Linda," he said. "You've made incredible progress, but sometimes our bodies hold on to stress in ways we don't even realize. We need to dig deeper." Linda left the office feeling a sense of dread creeping into her chest. She had come so far, and now this? Was she doing something wrong? Was she truly at risk again? The weight of it all hit her, and for the first time in months, she felt helpless. In the days following the doctor's visit, Linda couldn't shake the sense of unease. She spent hours reflecting on everything, the routines, the habits, and the choices she had made. Had she really been doing enough? Had she been so focused on her physical health that she had ignored the emotional weight she had been carrying for years? As much as Linda had focused on managing stress, she realized that there were still unresolved issues that were weighing on her. The pressure at work was relentless, projects never seemed to end, and the expectations from her boss were higher than ever. Sarah's college applications had added another layer of stress, and Linda had been too wrapped up in trying to be the perfect mother to notice the toll it was taking. Dan, too, was under his own pressures, and though they had their moments, Linda realized she hadn't been fully present with him. More than that, Linda had never fully dealt with the emotional baggage she had carried from her past. Her childhood experiences, the sense of always having to be strong, always putting others first. It was as if she had built a wall around herself to protect her vulnerabilities, but in doing so, she had inadvertently built a fortress that kept out more than just the pain. It kept out the peace. One evening, as Linda sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, she found herself facing a truth she had long avoided: she hadn't fully processed the emotional scars from her past. Her upbringing had taught her to always keep moving forward, to put on a brave face, and never show weakness. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this mindset, this constant push to avoid vulnerability, had contributed to her stress. It had led her to suppress emotions, to ignore her own needs, and to deny herself the chance to heal. "I've been running on empty for too long," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the quiet evening air. The realization hit hard, and Linda found herself in tears. She had been so focused on maintaining control over her physical health that she had neglected the emotional healing she so desperately needed. She had been so concerned with managing her blood pressure that she hadn't allowed herself the space to truly heal and release the stress she had been holding onto for years. The next morning, Linda made a decision. She wouldn't let this setback define her. She wouldn't let it be the end of her journey, but rather, a new beginning. Dr. Stevens was right, she needed to dig deeper. She needed to address the emotional aspects of her health just as much as the physical ones. Linda reached out to a therapist she had seen briefly years ago, someone who specialized in emotional wellness and stress management. She knew that she had to open herself up to vulnerability, to confront the things she had buried, and to find a way to heal. The process wouldn't be easy, but Linda was ready. She was no longer willing to let the stresses of life control her. As Linda began her therapy sessions, she found herself gradually opening up. She learned new coping strategies, explored the roots of her past, and slowly began to release the hold that stress had on her. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but Linda felt a glimmer of hope. She realized that she had always been strong, strong enough to face whatever came her way. But this time, she would do it with a new understanding. True strength came from embracing vulnerability and learning to heal. Weeks passed, and Linda felt the shift. Her blood pressure improved, yes, but more importantly, she felt lighter, freer. The weight she had carried for so long was slowly lifting, piece by piece. Linda no longer felt like she was on a tightrope, constantly walking the line between stress and survival. Instead, she began to embrace balance. A balance between work, family, self-care, and emotional well-being. Linda knew that the road ahead would still have challenges. There would be more stress, more setbacks, and more moments of doubt. But this time, she was ready. She had learned that health wasn't just about the numbers on a chart, it was about the mind, the heart, and the soul. And with each step she took, Linda was healing not just her body, but her spirit. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Linda had made a lot of progress over the last few months. She had tackled the physical aspects of her health, improving her blood pressure, managing stress, and making more mindful choices. Yet, there was one area that Linda hadn't fully embraced: rest. It wasn't that Linda didn't sleep, she certainly did, or at least, she thought she did. But her rest had never been truly restorative. The nights she spent tossing and turning were more common than she cared to admit, and more often than not, she woke up still feeling tired. It wasn't until her last therapy session, after a particularly grueling week at work, that Linda realized just how crucial sleep was to her well-being. As she discussed her progress with her therapist, Dr. Mallory, she found herself bringing up the subject of sleep. "I've been doing everything right. I exercise, I eat well, I manage my stress. But for some reason, I still feel exhausted all the time," Linda confessed, her voice tinged with frustration. Dr. Mallory paused, her thoughtful gaze fixed on Linda. Have you considered the quality of your sleep, Linda? It's not just about getting enough hours, it's about the kind of rest your body is getting. Linda hadn't thought much about that. Sure, she slept for 8 hours a night, but that didn't mean she was getting the deep, restorative sleep that her body needed. She had assumed that if she was in bed for enough time, it would be enough. But Dr. Mallory's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after the session ended. That night, as Linda settled into bed, she began to think about how her sleep patterns had changed over the years. She recalled her early days as a young mother, waking up every few hours to care for Sarah when she was a baby. Even after Sarah had grown older, Linda had kept the same habit of staying up late, preparing for the next day, checking emails, or watching TV to unwind. Sleep had become a secondary concern, something that was pushed aside in favor of productivity. Even though Linda had made many healthy changes to her life, she had never fully recognized the importance of quality rest. Sleep, she now understood, wasn't just a luxury or something that happened automatically, it was a critical part of maintaining a healthy body, mind, and heart. Linda decided to do some research. She discovered that sleep was far more important than she had ever imagined. Her blood pressure wasn't the only thing at risk. Sleep deprivation was linked to everything from heart disease and diabetes to anxiety and depression. Moreover, not getting enough restorative sleep could increase the level of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol, when elevated for prolonged periods, could raise blood pressure and wreak havoc on overall health. Linda also learned that quality sleep involved more than just the number of hours spent in bed. It required cycles of deep sleep and REM sleep, which were essential for physical restoration and emotional processing. She realized that simply lying down for a long period didn't guarantee she was getting the rest her body needed to fully recover. Determined to make changes, Linda decided to focus on improving the quality of her sleep. The first step was creating a bedtime routine that prioritized relaxation. She set a consistent bedtime for herself, aiming to go to sleep at the same time each night, even on weekends. Linda knew that keeping a routine would help regulate her body's internal clock, making it easier to fall asleep and wake up feeling refreshed. The next step was eliminating distractions. Linda had been guilty of checking her phone or watching TV late into the night, hoping it would help her unwind. But, as she learned, the blue light from screens interfered with her body's natural production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep. Linda decided to shut off all screens an hour before bed and replace them with calming activities, like reading a book or practicing relaxation techniques. Linda also invested in a more comfortable mattress and softer, breathable bedding to ensure that her body had the best possible environment for sleep. She even created a calming bedtime ritual, dimmed lights, a cup of herbal tea, and a few minutes of deep breathing exercises before lying down. The first few nights were tough. Linda had grown so accustomed to her old habits that she found it difficult to break free. She tossed and turned, finding it hard to turn off her racing thoughts and fall asleep quickly. At times, she felt frustrated, this wasn't going as smoothly as she had hoped. But she remained committed to the process, reminding herself that change took time. Linda also noticed a difference in her body the next morning. She woke up feeling groggy, despite going to bed earlier than usual. Her mind was foggy, and it was hard to shake the feeling of fatigue. But Linda knew she couldn't give up just because it was uncomfortable at first. She had experienced setbacks before, and she was determined to stick to her new routine. After about a week, something changed. Linda began to feel a shift in her energy levels. The nights when she fell asleep easily and stayed asleep longer began to increase. Slowly, her body started to adapt to the new routine. She was no longer waking up in the middle of the night feeling restless, and she found that she felt more refreshed in the mornings. The most surprising part, however, was how much her blood pressure started to stabilize. For weeks, it had fluctuated, despite her efforts with diet, exercise, and stress management. But as Linda's sleep improved, so did her health. It was as if her body finally had the time it needed to heal and recover. Linda also noticed a shift in her mood. With more restful sleep, she felt calmer, more patient, and less reactive to stress. Her relationships with Dan and Sarah became easier, and her energy levels improved throughout the day. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As Linda continued her journey toward better health, she realized just how vital sleep was to her well-being. She learned to respect rest as a powerful tool for physical and emotional recovery. The more she embraced quality sleep, the more she noticed how much it contributed to her overall sense of balance. Linda also recognized that her busy lifestyle had made it difficult to prioritize rest, but now she was more intentional about finding time for herself. She no longer pushed herself to stay up late or overwork, and instead, she made sleep a priority. In doing so, Linda finally found the balance she had been seeking all along, a balance between work, family, health, and rest. Linda's story was a reminder that health wasn't just about diet and exercise, it was also about giving the body the rest it needed to function properly. By embracing sleep as an essential part of her routine, Linda had found a new source of energy, clarity, and resilience. It was an ongoing journey, but Linda felt confident that she was finally on the right path. And as she lay in bed that night, feeling more rested than she had in years, Linda smiled softly. She had learned the hard way that true health came from nurturing every aspect of her well-being, including the restful moments that allowed her body to heal. For Linda, the road to health and balance had been anything but easy. Every time she felt like she had taken one step forward, life had a way of throwing her off course. But she had learned something valuable in recent months: stress was a constant. Whether it was caused by external factors like work pressure or by internal emotional battles, stress was inevitable. The key, she now understood, wasn't to avoid it but to find healthy ways to cope with it. However, just when she felt she had mastered the art of managing her stress levels, something unexpected came crashing into her life, threatening to unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Linda received the phone call that would change everything. She had just returned from a morning walk, feeling at peace with the world. The call came while she was enjoying her cup of coffee, sitting by the window in her kitchen. Her heart sank when she saw the name on the screen. It was Sarah's school. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson." The voice on the other end was calm but stern. "Yes, this is Linda," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm calling to inform you that there's been an incident involving your daughter, Sarah. We need you to come down to the school immediately." The words hit Linda like a punch to the gut. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's safe, but we need you to speak with the principal." "I'm afraid I can't give you any more details over the phone." The line went dead, and Linda's hands shook as she stared at the screen. Her thoughts raced, each one more frantic than the last. What could have happened? Was Sarah in trouble? Was she hurt? Without wasting another moment, Linda grabbed her keys and rushed out the door, her mind spiraling into worst-case scenarios. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure: this was not the kind of stress she was prepared for. At the school, Linda was ushered into a sterile conference room, where Principal Thompson and a few other staff members waited. Linda's heart pounded as she took a seat, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm glad you could make it," Principal Thompson said, his voice measured but firm. "Let me explain what happened. Sarah had gotten into an altercation with another student during lunch. It wasn't physical, but it had escalated quickly, and the situation had become tense. According to the reports, Sarah had stood up to the other student, who had been bullying a classmate. In the heat of the moment, Sarah had used harsh words, something that the school's zero-tolerance policy did not take lightly. Linda's mind was reeling. Sarah? Her daughter? She couldn't fathom the situation. Sarah had always been a well-behaved student, known for her kindness and empathy. The thought that her daughter was involved in a confrontation, especially one that involved bullying, was difficult to process. "Sarah is in the nurse's office right now. We're not placing any blame yet, but we do need to investigate further," Principal Thompson continued. She's not in any immediate danger, but we ask that you speak with her and help us understand what led to this." Linda felt the tension in the room thicken. "Of course," she said, her voice strained. "I'll speak with her right away." When Linda walked into the nurse's office, she found Sarah sitting on the edge of the examination table, her face pale and drawn. The moment Sarah saw her mother, she jumped up and rushed into Linda's arms. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Linda pulled back slightly to look at her daughter. "Tell me everything, sweetheart. What happened?" Sarah took a deep breath and started to explain. It turned out that Sarah had been standing up for a friend who had been repeatedly bullied by the same student. For weeks, the student had been teasing and harassing Sarah's friend, but no one had taken it seriously. When Sarah intervened, she didn't hold back. She let her frustration show, and in the heat of the moment, she said some things that the other student found offensive. Linda listened carefully, her heart aching for her daughter. She understood why Sarah had acted the way she did. She had been standing up for what was right. But at the same time, Linda knew that the consequences of her actions had to be addressed. "I'm proud of you for standing up for your friend, Sarah," Linda said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "But we need to find a way to do it without making the situation worse." That evening, Linda sat in bed, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had always prided herself on being a strong mother, on being able to handle whatever came her way. But this situation felt different. This wasn't a simple issue of blood pressure or stress management, this was about Sarah's future and the lessons she would take with her into adulthood. Linda's mind kept returning to the conversation with Principal Thompson. The school had a policy to follow, and Linda understood that. But she also knew that this was a teaching moment, one that would impact not only Sarah's reputation but also her emotional development. How could she guide Sarah through this and ensure that she learned the right lessons without feeling shame or regret? Her emotions fluctuated between anger and concern, frustration and understanding. It was a delicate balance, one that Linda wasn't sure she was ready to navigate. She had always been good at managing her own stress, but how would she cope with the stress of watching her daughter go through something so challenging? The next few days were filled with meetings, emails, and conversations with the school. Linda knew she needed to be there for Sarah, to provide both guidance and support. But she also knew that she couldn't shield her from the consequences of her actions. There needed to be a balance. Sarah needed to learn the importance of taking responsibility for her words and actions while also understanding that standing up for others was something to be proud of. Linda spent hours talking with Sarah, helping her process what had happened. They talked about the power of words, about the importance of choosing battles wisely, and about how to stand up for others in a way that didn't escalate the situation. Linda also made sure to emphasize the importance of emotional intelligence, understanding when to speak out and when to walk away. As the days passed, Linda watched Sarah grow stronger, more aware of her own actions and their consequences. It wasn't easy, but Linda was proud of her daughter for learning from the experience. And Linda? She, too, had learned something important. Life would always present challenges, some big, some small. The key was not to avoid them but to approach them with resilience, understanding, and a willingness to grow. The days after the incident at school had been challenging, not only for Sarah but for Linda as well. They had worked through the situation together, but Linda couldn't help but feel a weight pressing down on her. She had always tried to shield Sarah from difficulties, but life had a way of throwing curveballs, and Linda couldn't always protect her daughter from the consequences of her actions. As Sarah's emotions began to settle, Linda found herself dealing with her own set of emotions, guilt, regret, and a deep sense of vulnerability. Was she doing enough as a mother? Had she been too lenient, or was she being too hard on Sarah? In her attempt to guide her daughter, Linda had started to question her own role, wondering if she had made the right decisions in the past. One evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Linda sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of paperwork she had been ignoring for days. Her thoughts kept returning to Sarah's recent struggles, but soon, they drifted back to another time, back to when Linda herself had been a young woman, just beginning to navigate the complex world of adulthood. The past had a way of creeping up on Linda, and tonight, it did so with full force. Linda had been a young, ambitious woman who had big dreams, but life hadn't always been easy. Her relationship with her own parents had been strained, and she had often felt as though she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. There were moments in her youth when she wished someone had been there to guide her, to offer her wisdom, to help her avoid the mistakes she made. Linda had learned the hard way that some things couldn't be undone, no matter how much she wanted to go back and change them. The pain of past mistakes lingered, even after all these years. And as she thought about Sarah's recent struggles, Linda couldn't help but wonder if her own unresolved issues were somehow affecting her ability to parent in the way she wanted. The next morning, Linda woke up early and went for her usual walk around the neighborhood. As she strolled through the quiet streets, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she hadn't fully dealt with her past. She had been so focused on building a better life for herself and Sarah that she hadn't truly confronted the ghosts that haunted her. She paused by a park bench, sitting down to gather her thoughts. The early morning sun bathed the world in a soft, golden light, but Linda felt like she was in a fog. She had always been able to push through her emotions, to keep going no matter what, but now, that strategy didn't seem to be working. A memory surfaced, one that Linda hadn't thought about in years. It was the day she had left her small town to pursue her dreams in the city. She had been young, full of hope, but also terrified. Her parents had never fully supported her decision, and in the end, their lack of encouragement had driven a wedge between them. She had been determined to prove herself, but in doing so, she had closed off a part of her heart to the very people who had raised her. Linda had made peace with her decision to leave, but as the years passed, she began to wonder if she had made the right choice. She had gained so much, success, independence, and a family of her own, but she had also lost something along the way. The relationship with her parents had never fully healed, and she had missed out on precious moments with them before it was too late. As Linda walked back to the house, she realized that perhaps it was time to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Sarah, not just about the recent incident at school, but about their family's history, their shared experiences, and the lessons they had both learned along the way. That afternoon, after lunch, Linda sat down with Sarah on the porch. It was a quiet moment, just the two of them, with the sound of birds chirping in the background. Linda took a deep breath before speaking. "You know, sweetheart," she began softly, "sometimes, we all make mistakes. I've made a lot of them in my life, and sometimes, I wish I could go back and fix them." Sarah looked up at her mom, her expression thoughtful. "But you can't go back, right, Mom?" "No," Linda replied, her voice steady. "You can't. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing to accept. But what we can do is learn from our mistakes, and that's what I want for you." "I don't want to disappoint you, Mom," Sarah said quietly. Linda smiled gently, her heart swelling with love. "You haven't, sweetheart. You've made a mistake, yes. But you're learning, and that's the most important thing. I just want you to understand that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you learn from them and try to do better next time." The conversation shifted, and Linda found herself telling Sarah more about her own past, the decisions she had made, the mistakes she had lived with, and the lessons she had learned the hard way. For the first time in years, Linda allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of her daughter, showing her the side of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. "I wasn't perfect, and I didn't always make the right choices," Linda continued. "But I always tried to learn and grow from each experience. That's all we can do, Sarah." Over the next few weeks, Linda began to feel a shift within herself. By confronting her past and sharing her experiences with Sarah, she had begun to break free from the burden of regret that had held her back for so long. She realized that she didn't need to be perfect, nor did she need to shelter Sarah from every mistake. Instead, she needed to give herself and her daughter the grace to learn, grow, and move forward. Linda also began to take steps to heal her relationship with her parents. She had never fully reconciled with them, but she knew now that it was never too late to start. A simple phone call, a message of understanding, or an open conversation could be the first step toward healing old wounds. As Linda sat on the porch that evening, looking out over the yard, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her past, and she had come to terms with the fact that, like everyone else, she was a work in progress. But that was okay. Life wasn't about being flawless, it was about growing, learning, and showing up for the people who mattered most. For Linda, this was a new chapter in her life. One where she could embrace her imperfections, accept the past for what it was, and move forward with an open heart. She no longer felt weighed down by regret, instead, she felt empowered to be the mother, the woman, and the person she had always wanted to be. And as she looked at Sarah, who was now growing into a thoughtful young woman, Linda knew that the lessons she had learned would be passed on to her daughter, not as a way to avoid pain, but as a guide to facing it head-on with resilience and hope. The weeks that followed had been a whirlwind for Linda. After the school incident, she had been busy juggling Sarah's emotional recovery, her work commitments, and her ongoing self-reflection. Linda had made peace with her past and was learning to be a better mother. But just when things seemed to be settling, life threw another unexpected challenge her way, one that would reveal the power of support from the most unlikely source. It came in the mail one Tuesday afternoon, a simple white envelope with no return address. Linda's first thought was that it was just another piece of junk mail or an advertisement. But as she tore open the envelope, a folded letter fell into her hands. The handwriting on the front of the letter was familiar, too familiar. It was from her father. For years, Linda had not heard from her parents. After she moved to the city, there had been a slow but steady decline in communication. Arguments had piled up, and her decision to move away had created a rift that had never fully healed. For a long time, Linda had convinced herself that her parents didn't understand her, that they didn't approve of the path she had chosen. But this letter, this unexpected letter, seemed to change everything. With trembling hands, Linda unfolded the letter. She began to read, her heart beating faster with each word. Dear Linda. I don't know where to begin, and I certainly don't know if you'll even read this. But I've been thinking a lot lately about the years that have passed and the choices we've all made. I know that I failed you as a father in many ways, and I deeply regret that. The truth is, I was never very good at expressing myself, and for that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the times I made you feel like you had to carry the weight of the world alone. I know I wasn't there when you needed me the most, and that's something I can never undo. I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become. I've watched you from afar, and despite everything, I've always admired your strength. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't think I deserve it, but I do hope we can begin to talk again. If you're willing, I would like to start over, to rebuild whatever we had. I understand if you don't want that, but I wanted you to know that I'm here. Love. Dad. Linda sat there, the letter in her hands, stunned. She had read it 3 times, trying to process the emotions that were flooding through her. There were so many things she wanted to say, so many feelings that had been locked away for years. But in this moment, all she could do was sit in silence and let the weight of her father's words wash over her. It wasn't the apology she had been waiting for, but it was something more, a recognition of the hurt, an acknowledgement of the distance between them. For so long, Linda had blamed her father for their fractured relationship, but now, as she held the letter in her hands, she realized something. He had been doing the best he could, just like she had. That evening, as Sarah sat across from her at the dinner table, Linda felt an overwhelming need to share the letter with her daughter. The words from her father had opened up a floodgate of emotions, and Linda knew she couldn't navigate this new chapter alone. She needed Sarah's support just as much as she had supported her in the past. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something, Linda began, her voice soft but filled with a quiet urgency. Of course, Mom. What's going on? Sarah looked up, sensing the seriousness in Linda's tone. Linda took a deep breath. I got a letter today, from my father. After all these years, he reached out. He's sorry for the way things turned out between us, and he wants to start over. Sarah's eyes widened, and she put down her fork. Wow, that's huge. How do you feel about it? Linda paused, trying to find the right words. Honestly? I don't know yet. I'm still processing everything. But I can't deny that I'm hurt, confused, and I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him. But part of me wants to, because I can't keep carrying this weight around. Sarah reached out and took her mother's hand. Mom, I think you should give it a chance. I know it's scary, and I know it's going to take time. But sometimes, people surprise us, you know. Maybe this is his way of saying he wants to be a part of your life again. And if you can forgive him, if you can make that decision, it might help you heal. Linda smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest. Her daughter's words were simple, yet profound. Sarah, even at her young age, seemed to understand the power of forgiveness better than Linda did. You're right, Sarah. I can't keep holding on to the past. I have to decide if I'm willing to move forward, for my own sake. The next day, Linda sat down to write a letter of her own. She had no idea what would come of it, but she knew she had to take the first step. She wrote from the heart, letting the words flow freely without overthinking them. Dear Dad. Thank you for your letter. It took me a long time to process everything, and I've been holding on to so much anger and hurt for years. But after reading your words, I realized that I've been carrying this weight on my own for too long. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to try to rebuild our relationship. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, and I'm not ready to forget everything that happened. But I'm ready to take the first step, however small that might be. Let's see where this goes. Love. Linda. Sending the letter wasn't easy, but as soon as Linda dropped it in the mailbox, she felt a sense of relief. She didn't know what the future held, and she wasn't sure if reconciliation was even possible. But she knew that taking this step was important, for herself, for her father, and for Sarah. As Linda returned home that evening, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The road ahead might be uncertain, but she had taken a significant step toward healing. She wasn't alone in this journey. Sarah had shown her the importance of forgiveness, of letting go of the past in order to move forward with hope. And, as Linda sat down for dinner with her daughter, she realized that this moment, this act of vulnerability, wasn't just about repairing a relationship with her father. It was about repairing herself. After sending the letter to her father, Linda found herself in a state of anxious anticipation. She wasn't sure what she expected, or if she expected anything at all. Her father had reached out, but would he actually follow through? Would this be the beginning of a new chapter for them, or would it be another disappointing attempt that ended in heartbreak? Only time would tell. Days passed, and Linda tried to stay focused on her daily routine. She kept herself busy with work and taking care of Sarah, but in the back of her mind, the thought of her father lingered. She found herself checking the mail every day, waiting for some kind of response, some sign that her effort to reconnect hadn't been in vain. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a week after Linda had sent the letter. She was sitting in her home office, reviewing work emails, when the phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and froze. The number wasn't one she recognized, but something about it made her hesitate. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. But then, her heart pounded, and she found herself answering the call. Hello. Linda's voice trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. Linda. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, her father's. Linda's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to call so soon, and the sound of his voice brought with it a rush of emotions. The walls she had carefully built around herself began to crack. Yes, Dad. It's me, Linda replied, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the years between them hung in the air, thick and unspoken. Finally, her father broke the silence. "I got your letter. I've been reading it over and over, and I want you to know that it means more to me than you can imagine. I didn't expect you to write back, but hearing from you, well, it's been a wake-up call. I've been living with regret for so long, and I'm tired of it." Linda swallowed hard. The words were simple, but they struck deep. Her father was acknowledging the pain, the distance, and the years of silence. It was the kind of honesty she had longed for, and it sent a wave of relief through her chest. "I'm glad you reached out, Dad," she said softly. "I've been carrying a lot of pain from the past too. I wasn't sure what to expect when I sent the letter, but I'm glad we're talking." Her father let out a breath. "I don't expect things to magically heal overnight. I don't expect you to forget the past, and I know I can't undo the mistakes I made. But I want to try, Linda. I want to try to rebuild what we had, or at least find a way to start again." Linda closed her eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Rebuilding a relationship after so many years of silence was not going to be easy, but it was a step in the right direction. The idea of healing seemed daunting, but with her father's willingness to try, she could see the faintest glimmer of hope. The call ended with tentative plans to meet in person. Linda wasn't sure what that meeting would look like, or even how she would feel when the time came. But she had made the decision. She was going to face her father, just as she had faced her past, with all its complexities. The next few days were filled with nervous anticipation. Linda had already told Sarah about the call, and her daughter was supportive, though also a little anxious about how the meeting might go. Linda shared her mixed feelings too. She wasn't sure if she was ready to dive into the past, but she knew it was a conversation that needed to happen. It was a Saturday morning when Linda and her father met at a small cafe in the town where Linda had grown up. She hadn't been back to this place in years, and walking into the cafe felt like stepping into another time, another life. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, but the moment felt heavy, as if every detail had been frozen in time. Linda spotted her father sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked older, grayer hair, more lines on his face, but there was something comforting about the familiarity of his presence. He stood up as she approached, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. "Hi, Dad," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt vulnerable in this moment, unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. Her father smiled softly, his eyes filled with the same mixture of regret and hope that Linda had seen in his letter. "It's good to see you, Linda." They both sat down, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but rather filled with unspoken words and emotions. After a long pause, Linda spoke first. "I don't know where to begin," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "There's so much that's happened, so much I've carried. And I'm not sure I can just let it all go." Her father nodded, his expression one of understanding. "I don't expect you to. I know it won't be easy, and I'm not asking you to forget everything. I just want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." Linda took a deep breath. It was the beginning of something new, something fragile. The past was never going to be erased, but this moment, the courage to face each other, was a step in the right direction. Over the next few months, Linda and her father began to rebuild their relationship, one step at a time. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when the old wounds resurfaced. But Linda had learned to face her past, to embrace the imperfections and the pain, knowing that healing was not about perfection, it was about progress. Sarah was supportive of the process, even as Linda navigated the complexities of forgiving her father. She knew that her mother was on a journey of her own, one that would take time and patience. But she also saw the changes in her mom, how the weight of the past had begun to lift, how Linda was learning to let go of the anger that had held her back for so long. As Linda stood on the threshold of this new chapter, she knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. But she had found the strength to face the unknown, and that, in itself, was a victory. The weeks that followed Linda's first meeting with her father were a blur of emotions, mixed with hope and uncertainty. Rebuilding a relationship with someone who had been absent for most of her life was never going to be easy. But as Linda continued to meet with him regularly, something began to shift. It wasn't instant, nor was it smooth, but the process had started. However, life wasn't just about reconciling with her father. As Linda stepped into the next phase of her life, new, unexpected challenge would force her to confront yet another layer of herself, one that she hadn't anticipated. It was late one Friday afternoon when Linda's phone rang. She was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee while working on an article for work. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the urgency in the caller's voice immediately caught her attention. "Hello, Linda." The voice on the other end was frantic, a tone she hadn't expected. "This is Dr. Martinez from the clinic. I'm afraid I have some concerning news regarding your recent tests. Could you come in as soon as possible?" The words hit Linda like a ton of bricks. Her mind raced, and her heart pounded in her chest. Tests? What tests? She had gone in for a routine checkup a few weeks ago, but she hadn't anticipated anything out of the ordinary. I don't understand. What's going on?" Linda managed to stammer, her thoughts spiraling. Dr. Martinez sighed on the other end. "I'd rather explain it in person, Linda. Can you come in tomorrow morning? It's important." A chill ran down Linda's spine, and she suddenly felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had been feeling fine, aside from the usual stress of balancing work and family. But now, an overwhelming sense of dread settled in her stomach. The unknown was always the hardest to face, and in this moment, Linda wasn't sure what she was about to face. The next morning, Linda drove to the clinic with her thoughts racing. She had always taken her health for granted, assuming that the worst was something that happened to other people. She had never expected to be the one sitting on the other side of a doctor's desk, awaiting bad news. When Linda arrived, she was escorted to a small examination room, where the sterile smell of antiseptic seemed to add to the tension. She sat nervously on the edge of the chair, her fingers clenched together as she waited for Dr. Martinez to arrive. When the door opened, Linda was greeted with a serious expression. Dr. Martinez was holding a folder, and her face held the kind of sympathy that Linda wasn't sure she could handle at the moment. "Linda," Dr. Martinez began, taking a seat across from her, "I know this must be difficult, but I want to be transparent with you. We've received the results from your tests, and unfortunately, they indicate that you have a health condition that needs immediate attention." Linda felt a lump form in her throat. Her mind was already reeling, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. Dr. Martinez continued, "You have high blood pressure, and it's at a level that requires intervention. If left untreated, it could lead to serious complications down the line." Linda's hands trembled as she processed the information. High blood pressure. It wasn't something she had ever considered for herself. She had always been active, ate fairly well, and was in her late 30s. But the doctor's words were clear, she couldn't ignore it. "Are you saying it's life-threatening?" Linda asked, her voice shaking. Dr. Martinez nodded. "Not right now, but if you don't take steps to manage it, the risks of heart disease, stroke, and kidney damage increase. We need to start a treatment plan immediately." Linda felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. The reality of the situation settled in, and she realized just how fragile life could be. After the appointment, Linda walked to her car in a daze. The air felt thick and oppressive as she tried to make sense of everything the doctor had said. High blood pressure. She had always prided herself on being healthy, but now, she faced the sobering truth that her body wasn't as invincible as she had once believed. The drive home felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out in front of her like an endless road. When she finally arrived at home, she sat in her car for a few moments, trying to gather her thoughts before going inside. As soon as she entered the house, Sarah noticed the change in her mother's demeanor. She was more subdued, her usual bright energy replaced with a quiet tension. "Mom, what happened?" Sarah asked, concern lacing her voice. Linda sat down on the couch, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. "I've been diagnosed with high blood pressure," she said quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of the words. "The doctor said I need to start treatment right away, or it could lead to serious health problems down the line." Sarah sat beside her, her expression a mixture of worry and empathy. "Mom, we're going to get through this, okay? You're going to take care of yourself, and we'll get the right treatment. It's going to be okay." Linda smiled weakly, appreciating her daughter's comforting words. But inside, she felt a deep sense of fear. She had always tried to protect Sarah from life's hardest truths, but now she found herself in a position where she couldn't shield her from the reality of her own health. The following weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's visits, new medications, and lifestyle changes. Linda had to overhaul her diet, incorporate more exercise into her daily routine, and learn how to manage her stress more effectively. At first, it all felt overwhelming, like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. But in the midst of the struggle, Linda found unexpected strength. She was determined not to let this health scare define her or her future. Her father's recent willingness to reconnect had inspired her to take control of her life in ways she hadn't before. She wasn't going to let high blood pressure take that away from her. As she made small changes, cutting down on salt, exercising more regularly, and practicing mindfulness, Linda began to feel better. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she felt like giving up, but each day she pushed forward, one step at a time. Sarah, too, was a constant source of support. She kept Linda motivated, reminding her of the importance of taking care of herself not just for her own sake, but for the sake of their future together. In the end, Linda learned that life was fragile, and it could change in an instant. She had learned to never take her health, her family, or her relationships for granted. As she moved forward, she knew that facing her health issues head-on was just one part of a larger journey, one of healing, forgiveness, and growth. Her relationship with her father continued to evolve, and they slowly began to rebuild what had been lost. Linda had learned to embrace vulnerability, to allow herself to receive the support she had always given to others. But above all, she had learned the importance of taking control of her life, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She was no longer the person who would sit idly by, letting life happen to her. She was ready to fight for her health, her relationships, and her future. Linda's life had always been a careful balancing act: work, family, friendships, and the ever-present responsibilities of adulthood. But after her diagnosis, something fundamental within her shifted. No longer could she continue to run at full speed, ignoring the quiet warnings her body had been sending her. She had to learn to slow down, to prioritize the things that truly mattered. The days following her doctor's visit were filled with adjustment. Linda had spent years putting others' needs above her own. It wasn't until now, when her health was on the line, that she realized how little attention she had given to her own well-being. She had always thought she was invincible, always managing to juggle everything with ease. But high blood pressure had humbled her, forcing her to face the fact that she wasn't as strong as she had believed. The first change Linda made was her diet. She had never been one to indulge in unhealthy foods, but the long hours of work and constant rush of daily life had led her to rely on convenience. Frozen meals, takeout, and caffeine had been her constant companions, especially when she felt overwhelmed. But now, she had to make a conscious effort to transform the way she ate. Linda spent time reading up on heart-healthy meals and gradually started incorporating more vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins into her diet. The process wasn't immediate. At first, she found herself reaching for familiar comfort foods. But over time, she began to enjoy the new meals, and the small victories felt like huge accomplishments. She was nourishing her body, and that felt empowering. Alongside her diet, she started to make exercise a regular part of her day. Walking had become a new ritual, something that allowed her to clear her head while staying active. At first, the idea of physical exertion after years of neglecting her body felt daunting. But Linda quickly realized that a brisk walk around the block did wonders for her mood, and she gradually built up her stamina, adding more steps and duration to each walk. While Linda's health was her primary focus, she also knew that her family couldn't be neglected. For years, she had poured all her energy into providing for Sarah and keeping everything running smoothly. But now, she needed to shift her attention to nurturing the relationships that were most important to her. Sarah had noticed the change in her mother, how she seemed more present, more engaged. Linda had always been a devoted mother, but lately, it felt as though Sarah and Linda were moving in parallel lives, too absorbed in their own worlds to truly connect. One Sunday afternoon, Linda decided to take Sarah to the park, something they hadn't done in a while. They spent the afternoon playing frisbee, talking about Sarah's school friends, and just enjoying each other's company. The time together felt light, free from the pressures of work or family obligations. It reminded Linda of the bond they shared, a bond that had been tested but never broken. "I'm glad we're doing this, Mom," Sarah said, her voice full of warmth as they walked back to the car. "We need to do this more often." Linda smiled, the weight of the past few weeks easing as she saw the joy in her daughter's eyes. "We will, Sarah. I promise." In the midst of all these changes, Linda's relationship with her father continued to evolve. It hadn't been easy, but both of them were making an effort. Linda understood that healing the wounds of their past would take time, but they were starting to make progress. They began meeting once a week, sometimes at the same cafe where they had first reunited, sometimes at Linda's house. At first, the conversations were tentative, filled with awkward silences and unspoken emotions. But gradually, they began to share more, about their lives, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. One evening, Linda invited her father to dinner at her house. She had spent hours preparing a healthy, home-cooked meal, a way to show him how far she had come in her own journey toward health. They sat at the dinner table, the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation filling the air. Her father looked at her across the table, his expression serious but kind. "Linda," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I know I can't undo the mistakes I made. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud of the woman you've become, despite everything." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes, and for the first time, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. Her father's words meant more than she could express. They were a recognition of all the pain, the loss, and the healing that had taken place. It wasn't the resolution of all their issues, but it was a step forward. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought we'd get to this point, but I'm glad we're here." While Linda's life was changing in many positive ways, it wasn't without its challenges. Old habits were hard to break, and there were days when Linda wanted to give in to the stress, skip her walk, or indulge in unhealthy comfort food. But she had made a commitment to herself, and to Sarah, that she wouldn't go down that path. The biggest challenge Linda faced, however, was dealing with the emotional toll of her health diagnosis. She had always been the pillar of strength for her family, the one who could handle anything. But now, she was learning to be vulnerable, to admit that she needed help, and to accept her limitations. It was a humbling experience. There were moments when Linda doubted herself, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But she was learning that vulnerability didn't make her weak, it made her human. She reached out to friends when she needed support, leaned on Sarah for encouragement, and relied on her father for wisdom. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Linda stood by the window, looking out at the setting sun. She thought about everything she had been through, the struggles with her health, the rebuilding of her relationship with her father, and the ways she was learning to prioritize herself and her family. It had been a long road, and there was still much work to be done. But in that moment, she felt a sense of peace. Linda understood now that life was a journey, one that could not be rushed or controlled. There would always be challenges, always be obstacles. But it was how she faced those obstacles that mattered. She wasn't just surviving, she was learning to live more fully, more intentionally. She had found strength in her vulnerability, power in her healing, and, most importantly, she had found a new sense of balance. With a deep breath, Linda smiled to herself. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but she knew she was ready for whatever it held. Linda woke up that morning with a sense of anticipation. There was something about the crisp air and the clear sky that felt different, like a new chapter of her life was unfolding, one where she could finally find the peace she had been searching for. It had been a few months since her diagnosis, and though life wasn't perfect, it was definitely better. She had adapted to her new routine, her health was improving, and she was mending relationships with the people she cared about most. But there was still something stirring inside of her, an awareness that the journey wasn't over, that she still had lessons to learn. Linda had always been a planner, someone who prided herself on having everything figured out. But the one thing that life had consistently taught her was that things rarely went according to plan. Just when she thought she had things under control, a new challenge presented itself. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she received the email from her manager. The subject line read, "Important update on your job." The brief message that followed was simple but unnerving: "We are restructuring the team, and your role will be reassessed in the coming weeks. Please be prepared for potential changes." Linda stared at the screen, her heart sinking. Just as she had found stability, work, her steady anchor, was now uncertain. The idea of losing her job, especially when she was still getting accustomed to her new health routine, felt overwhelming. Her mind raced, and for the first time in months, the weight of anxiety gripped her. What if I lose everything? The familiar feeling of being out of control came rushing back, a stark contrast to the newfound balance she had fought so hard to achieve. The fear Linda felt wasn't just about her job, it was about losing the security she had built for herself and her daughter. She had always been the provider, the one who made sure everything was taken care of. The idea of not being able to do that, of not having control, unsettled her deeply. She called Sarah, needing to hear a familiar voice, hoping it would bring her some sense of reassurance. "Hey, Mom. What's going on?" Sarah's voice came through, steady and comforting. "I got this email about work," Linda said, her voice shaky. "They're restructuring, and there's a chance I could lose my job. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I'm scared." Sarah was quiet for a moment, as though processing her mother's words. Then, with the maturity of someone far older than her years, Sarah spoke. "Mom, I know you're scared, but you've got this. You've handled so much already. You've been through tough times before, and you came out stronger. This is just one more challenge. And whatever happens, I'll be here for you." Linda felt a lump form in her throat. She had always tried to protect Sarah, but in that moment, it was Sarah who was comforting her. The strength in her daughter's words gave her the courage to face the fear, not run from it. For the first time, Linda allowed herself to breathe, to sit with her fear and accept it as a part of the process. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Linda kept working diligently, focusing on what she could control. She exercised daily, ate the foods that nourished her, and made time for her family. But the question of her job loomed over her, and she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. Finally, the day arrived for her to meet with her manager. The meeting was short, but the outcome was clear: Linda's role would be eliminated, but she was offered a new position, a lateral move that would involve a change in responsibilities but still allow her to stay with the company. It wasn't what she had expected, and at first, the news hit her hard. But after the initial shock faded, something shifted within her. This wasn't the end, it was an opportunity. Linda realized that life had been teaching her something important, that even when things felt like they were falling apart, they were actually falling into place. The loss of her old role allowed her to explore something new, something that she might never have considered before. It was the very thing that had pushed her to embrace change in other areas of her life, her health, her relationships, and now her career. She walked out of that meeting feeling lighter, more open to whatever came next. The job wasn't a perfect fit, but it was an exciting new challenge that would allow her to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. Linda took some time to process the changes and reflect on what she had learned. She realized that her fear of losing control had held her back for so long, preventing her from embracing the unknown. But now, she was learning to see the unknown as a place of possibility, not peril. For the first time in a long while, Linda allowed herself to feel proud of her resilience. She had faced setbacks, challenges, and unexpected turns, but she had come through each one stronger. The uncertainty of the future no longer felt like a burden, it felt like an invitation to create something new. Later that week, Linda sat down with her father for one of their regular dinners. He had become more than just a source of support, he had become someone she could lean on for wisdom, someone who had seen the highs and lows of life and could offer perspective. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot lately," Linda began as they ate, the soft hum of the restaurant around them. "About everything that's happened, the diagnosis, the job change, the reconnection with you. It's all so much to take in." Her father nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "Life is never what we expect it to be. Sometimes, it takes a few wrong turns to get us to the right place. You've always been the one to keep going, Linda. That's something you've always had inside of you, strength, determination, even when you don't see it yourself." Linda smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thanks, Dad. I think I'm finally starting to see it too." Her father chuckled. "That's because you're not afraid of change anymore. You've learned that even when things seem like they're falling apart, they're just making room for something better." As Linda continued to adjust to her new job, her health was also improving. The lifestyle changes she had made were paying off, and she felt stronger, both physically and emotionally. She still faced challenges, but she was no longer afraid of them. Instead, she saw each obstacle as an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to build a life that felt more authentic to who she truly was. Her relationship with Sarah continued to strengthen. They laughed together more, shared more, and built a bond that would sustain them no matter what came their way. Linda knew that her daughter's strength was a reflection of her own, passed down from a mother who had fought for her health, her family, and her future. Linda had come a long way. And though the journey wasn't over, she now understood that the road ahead would be filled with both challenges and triumphs. But it was a journey she was ready to take. Linda stood at the edge of the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It had been a few months since her job had changed, and she had settled into her new role with a sense of calm that she hadn't expected. Her health had continued to improve, her family was stronger than ever, and for the first time in a long while, Linda felt like she was living on her terms. The journey had been long, with unexpected twists and turns, but in each of those moments, Linda had found pieces of herself she didn't know existed. She had learned that change didn't have to be feared, it could be embraced. She had learned that self-care wasn't selfish but essential. And most importantly, she had learned that life wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, growth, and being open to whatever came next. But today, as she stood by the lake, Linda realized that this chapter of her life wasn't just about her health or her career, it was about something deeper. It was about understanding her true strength. In the months that had passed, Linda had slowly learned to let go of the need for control. It wasn't easy, she had spent years managing every aspect of her life, from her job to her health to her relationships. But the health scare, the job change, and the emotional shifts had forced her to acknowledge that some things were beyond her control. She had spent countless hours reflecting on what it meant to let go. She realized that her fear of losing control had kept her trapped in a cycle of stress and anxiety. But now, she was slowly learning to trust the process, to trust that life, even when uncertain, could still lead to good things. The past year had taught Linda the power of surrender. She had learned that it was okay to not have all the answers, to not know every step ahead of time. Sometimes, the most profound growth came from simply allowing herself to be present, to be open to what life brought her way. The last few months had also revealed a part of Linda that she had long neglected, her passions. For years, she had been so focused on surviving and taking care of everyone else that she had lost touch with the things that once brought her joy. Now, with more space in her life, Linda was rediscovering the things that filled her heart. She had always loved writing, but over the years, it had become a distant memory, something pushed aside by work, obligations, and the daily grind. But one afternoon, as she sat at her desk, Linda felt the urge to pick up her pen. She started with a few lines, then a few pages, and before long, she was immersed in the process of creating again. Writing gave Linda a sense of freedom, a way to express herself that didn't require perfection or approval. It was hers alone. She found herself writing about the experiences that had shaped her, the struggles, the triumphs, the lessons. The more she wrote, the more she realized that this was a way for her to process everything she had gone through. The idea of one day publishing her work crossed her mind, but for now, she was content simply to write. It was her outlet, her way of healing, her form of self-expression. It reminded her that it was never too late to reconnect with what made her feel alive. One evening, as Linda and Sarah sat together in the living room, the conversation turned to the future. They had spent so much time talking about Linda's health, her job, and her recovery, but tonight, it felt right to discuss their hopes, dreams, and what they wanted to build together. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice tentative yet filled with curiosity. "Do you think we'll always be okay? I mean, even when things get hard, like when you were really sick, will we be okay?" Linda smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. It was a question she had asked herself many times during the past year, and the answer had become clearer with time. "Sarah, life will always have its ups and downs," Linda said, taking a deep breath. "But we've been through so much already, and we've come out stronger on the other side. As long as we're together, we will be okay. There's nothing we can't face as long as we face it together." Sarah looked at her mother, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I'm glad we're together," she said softly. "I think I've learned a lot from you, Mom. About being strong. About taking care of yourself, even when everything seems so busy." Linda's eyes welled with tears at Sarah's words. She hadn't realized just how much her own growth had influenced her daughter, how her resilience had shaped Sarah into the strong young woman she was becoming. As the months passed, Linda continued to embrace the changes in her life. Her health was stable, and she felt stronger each day. Her relationship with Sarah deepened, their bond solidified by shared experiences and mutual growth. The changes that had once seemed so overwhelming were now the very things that had helped her evolve into a more balanced, fulfilled person. But it wasn't just about health and career anymore. Linda was learning to take time for herself, to find joy in the small moments, and to honor her needs. She was building a life that felt authentic to who she truly was, not just who she thought she should be. That morning by the lake, Linda reflected on how far she had come. It had been a year of transformation, and while she couldn't predict what the future held, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. She had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain or struggle, it was about learning how to navigate it with grace, resilience, and a sense of hope. As the sun set over the horizon, Linda smiled to herself. There was still so much to discover, so much to experience. But she had finally realized that the journey itself was the destination. And that, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. In embracing the unknown, Linda had found her true strength. And with that strength, she was ready to step boldly into whatever the future had in store. Linda woke up that morning to the soft sounds of birds chirping outside her window, a reminder that life, in all its complexity, kept moving forward. She had learned to cherish these simple moments, the ones that once seemed insignificant but now held so much meaning. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes, growth, and challenges, but today felt different. Today, there was a sense of finality in the air, as if everything had come full circle. She sat up in bed and stretched, letting out a contented sigh. The journey she had started so long ago had led her to a place of peace. Her health was better than it had been in years, and the emotional weight she had carried for so long had lightened. She was no longer afraid of what the future held. Instead, She had come to understand that the future was shaped by the choices she made today, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. As Linda made her morning coffee, her mind wandered back to the beginning of her journey. It had all started with a simple question: what if I lose everything? That question had sent her on a path filled with uncertainty, fear, and challenges. She had been forced to confront her own vulnerabilities, to face the things she couldn't control, and to learn to trust herself in ways she never had before. But now, as she sipped her coffee and looked out over the lake, she realized how much she had gained from this experience. She had learned to slow down, to appreciate the little things, and to recognize that strength didn't always come from holding on, it came from letting go. Over the past year, Linda had become a different person. She had found courage in the face of fear, peace in the midst of chaos, and a deeper connection with her daughter and herself. The lessons had been hard-earned, but they had transformed her into someone who was no longer afraid to take risks, to change, or to live fully in the moment. Linda sat down at her desk that afternoon, opening the journal she had been keeping throughout this journey. It was a collection of thoughts, lessons, and reflections, each page a testament to her growth. She had written about her struggles, her triumphs, and the moments when everything seemed uncertain. But as she flipped through the pages, she saw a pattern, a recurring theme of resilience, self-discovery, and hope. She smiled as she read a passage from a few months earlier: I thought I was broken, but I'm learning that sometimes, we must be broken open in order to heal and grow. I'm not perfect, but I am enough. Those words had felt like a revelation at the time, and they still resonated with her. Linda had learned that perfection was an illusion. Life wasn't about getting everything right, it was about showing up, doing the best you can, and learning from every experience. As the days passed, Linda continued to embrace her new life with gratitude and grace. She was thriving in her new job, learning new skills, and finding joy in the unexpected moments of each day. She had become more present, more mindful of the relationships in her life, and more compassionate toward herself. But there was still one more thing that Linda wanted to do, something that had been on her heart for a long time. She wanted to give back. She wanted to share her journey with others, to inspire those who might be struggling with similar challenges. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping others navigate their own health journeys, offering support, and sharing the lessons she had learned. It was her way of honoring the growth she had experienced and paying it forward. Through this work, Linda discovered a new sense of purpose, a purpose that was bigger than herself. One afternoon, as she was volunteering, Linda met a woman named Julia. Julia was going through a difficult time, her health was deteriorating, and she felt overwhelmed by the changes in her life. Linda saw so much of herself in Julia, and she knew that she could offer her the same support and encouragement that she had once received. They sat down together, and Linda shared her story. She talked about the fears she had felt, the lessons she had learned, and how she had found strength in the most unlikely places. Julia listened intently, her eyes filled with hope as Linda spoke. "You're not alone," Linda told her gently. "I've been where you are, and I promise you, things can get better. You just have to trust the process and take it one step at a time." Julia's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that things could change. As Linda continued her work with others, she was reminded of just how powerful transformation could be. It wasn't about making drastic changes overnight, it was about taking small, intentional steps toward a better life. It was about embracing the unknown, trusting in the process, and knowing that even in the darkest moments, there was always the possibility for light. Linda had learned to trust herself and her ability to navigate whatever challenges life presented. She had learned that setbacks weren't failures, they were opportunities for growth. And most importantly, she had learned that no matter what happened, she was strong enough to handle it. One day, as Linda sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunset together, she reflected on everything she had experienced. The uncertainty, the fear, the growth, and the joy. She realized that this was her moment of clarity, the moment when she truly understood the power of embracing change. "You know, Sarah," Linda said, her voice filled with emotion, this journey wasn't just about health or work. It was about finding myself again. It was about understanding that I don't need to have everything figured out. I just need to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Sarah smiled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. You've taught me so much, Mom. I'm proud of you. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the path they had walked together. It wasn't always easy, but it had been worth it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Linda knew that this was just the beginning. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had learned to trust the process, to embrace change, and to live fully in the present moment. And with that, Linda took the final step on her journey, a step into the unknown, knowing that no matter what came next, she was ready for it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?